What if the woman you loved was never real? Not fake in the superficial sense, not a liar, not a manipulator, but unreal in a deeper, quieter way. What if she was a reflection, not a person, a mirror crafted from your hunger, your hopes, your need to be needed? From the very first time you looked into her eyes, something ancient stirred in you. Maybe it felt like home. Maybe it felt like salvation. And from that moment on, you began a silent trade, your identity for her affection, your strength for her softness. You didn't notice it at first. Love always arrives wearing disguises. It wraps itself in smiles, in late-night conversations, in the electricity of being seen. But over time, you weren't being seen, you were being shaped. Slowly, gently, inch by inch, you became someone molded by her gaze. And now years later, or maybe just months, you sit in silence wondering, did she ever love me? Or did she love what I gave her the power to control? They told you she was the answer, not just your partner, not just your lover, but your healer, your completion, your light in the dark. From the very first stories you heard, she was framed as divine, a celestial being draped in softness, made of grace, born to understand you, forgive you, rescue you. They painted her in fairy tales and romance films as the reward for your struggle, the balm to your ache, the one who would finally see the boy inside the man and love him back to life. And you believed it? How could you not? The entire world nodded in agreement. Your mother, your teachers, your friends, they all taught you to chase her, protect her, earn her love like a knight earning his crown. But what they didn't tell you is that the myth would cost you yourself. Because when you place a woman on a pedestal, you must kneel to see her. And in that posture, bowed, breathless, reaching, you begin to forget who you are. You start measuring your worth not by your principles, but by her approval. You tell yourself it's love, but it's worship. You call it connection, but it's dependency dressed in poetic language. She didn't ask for that power, but you gave it anyway. Because somewhere deep inside, you didn't want a partner. You wanted a savior. But what if she was never meant to save you? What if she was just human? And the holiness was your projection all along. So what were you in this grand myth they sold you? If she was the angel, you were the chaser, the fool with open hands and an open heart, hoping that love, or at least her version of it, would be enough to fix the gnawing silence inside you. You became the protector, the pleaser, the provider, bending yourself into versions you thought would be more lovable. You told yourself it was strength, this pursuit, this giving, this sacrificing. But if you're honest, brutally honest, it was something else. It was bargaining. You weren't offering love freely. You were negotiating for affection, trading pieces of yourself in hopes of being chosen. You didn't want to be seen, you wanted to be accepted. So you presented a filtered version of your masculinity. Not too rough, not too soft. Strong, but safe. Stoic, but sensitive. Every gesture was rehearsed. Every silence was strategic. You shaped yourself around what you thought she needed, never stopping to ask what you needed. And in doing so, you handed her the script not of who you are, but of who you were willing to become just to keep her close. And here's the heartbreak: she never asked you to kneel. You did that on your own. Not because she demanded it, but because somewhere deep inside you believed love had to be earned through self-erasure. You didn't want a relationship. You wanted to be worthy. But worthiness can't be borrowed through someone else's gaze. And love, if it's real, doesn't require you to disappear. Aristotle didn't write poetry. He didn't dress the world in soft metaphors or sentimental truths. He didn't need to. He looked at nature not with the eyes of a lover, but with the cold precision of a man who believed in essence over emotion. And what he saw stripped away centuries of illusion. When he said the female is, as it were, a mutilated male, he wasn't being cruel, he was being surgical. He wasn't attacking women. He was refusing to romanticize biology. To him, woman was not a goddess, not a muse, not a celestial answer to man's emptiness. She was simply different. Not lesser, not wicked, but other. Designed for something different. Shaped not by sentiment, but by survival. And maybe that's what terrifies you. That behind all your stories, your myths, your dreams of rescue and redemption lies a truth no one ever dared to say aloud, that love is not divine, that women are not angels, and that what you call chemistry may be nothing more than adaptation. You want her to be mystery, because mystery keeps the illusion alive. But Aristotle looked straight at nature raw, unsanitized, and didn't flinch. He didn't call her soft. He called her functional. And in that function, he saw strategy design, purpose, not romance. So ask yourself, what if the way you see her is not love, but myth? What if the pedestal you built was never for her, but for the fantasy you needed her to represent? What if love in its raw, unpolished form is not about mutuality at all? What if it isn't a gentle dance between equals, but a quiet war of positioning? A hierarchy dressed in the language of devotion. We're told that love is selfless, sacred, equal. But look closely, not at the words we say, but the roles we play. When you say, "I love her," are you loving her? Or are you kneeling before the image of healing she offers you? Are you drawn to her heart or to the fantasy that her presence makes you whole? Because the truth is, most men don't fall in love with women. They fall in love with relief. Relief from loneliness. Relief from confusion. Relief from the ache of not knowing who they are without being needed. And women, consciously or not, learn to become that relief. Not through dominance, but through reflection. She sees the part of you that longs to be seen. She mirrors back your hunger, your desire to be chosen. And in that mirror, you feel safe. But safety is not love. And reflection is not reality. You call her nurturing. But is she truly nurturing? Or is she responding to what you crave? Because if she is mirroring your wounds, your insecurities, your need for validation, then love isn't happening. Strategy is. Calibration is. You are not in partnership. You are in orbit, spinning around the gravity of your own unhealed self. And the deeper you fall, the less you see her, and the more you see the ideal you projected. That's not harmony. That's dependency disguised as romance. We're taught to believe that feminine softness is a virtue, that tenderness, empathy, and emotional openness are proof of her purity. But what if that softness isn't essence, but adaptation? Not all women are calculating, but all women are adaptive. Not because they're deceptive, but because they've had to be. In a world where the male is default, stronger, louder, more structurally empowered, a woman doesn't survive by force. She survives by reading the room, by learning how to shapeshift. And femininity in its most strategic form becomes a mirror polished to reflect what a man wants to see. You think she's sweet, but maybe she's responding to your need for sweetness. You think she's submissive, but maybe she's learned that submission is the quickest path to influence. This doesn't make her manipulative, it makes her brilliant. Because when power doesn't belong to you by structure, you learn to bend around it. And in bending, you gain access to something far more intimate than force, emotional leverage. She doesn't overpower you. She flows around you, like water around stone, shaping, smoothing, slipping into the cracks of your identity. And the truth is, she might not even realize she's doing it. Because this strategy isn't always taught. It's absorbed. It's inherited. Passed through generations of women who survived not by confronting power, but by seducing it. And you, the man who thinks he is leading, may not realize you've been following all along. Not because she took control, but because you gave it freely. To the version of her that told you what you needed to hear. Power doesn't always raise its voice. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it smiles. Sometimes it waits. You were taught to recognize power in its loudest forms: dominance, control, presence, command. But feminine power doesn't need to roar. It operates in the shadows, in the pauses, in the spaces between what's said and what's felt. And when you've never been given the structure, when you've never been the center of the system, you learn how to move around it. Quietly, elegantly, strategically. She doesn't challenge you head on. She doesn't need to. She learns your rhythm, your tone, your timing. She studies the small shifts in your mood, the hesitation in your voice, the patterns in your confessions. She learns what makes you open and what makes you hide. And over time, without you realizing it, she becomes essential, not by force, but by design. She doesn't demand your loyalty. She becomes the comfort you seek when the world overwhelms you, the voice you consult before you act, the gaze you crave before you believe in yourself. This isn't weakness. This is precision. You call her emotional, but maybe she's surgical. You think she's soft, but maybe that softness is camouflage, not fake, just deliberate. Because when you're not given the tools of power, you master the tools of persuasion. When you can't own the battlefield, you learn to control the terrain. And the battlefield in this case is not the outside world. It's your mind, your memory, your need. She doesn't overpower you. She becomes the gravity you orbit, and you call it love. You didn't fall in love with her. You fell in love with what she made you feel about yourself. That's the part no one tells you, that most love stories are not about two people seeing each other clearly, but about two people reflecting what the other is desperate to believe. She wasn't a mystery. She was a mirror. And the truth is, you didn't want to meet her, not the real her. You wanted to meet the woman who saw you as enough. The woman who looked at your brokenness and smiled. The woman who, by simply existing, made you feel worthy again. But that feeling, that high, it didn't come from who she was. It came from the image you projected onto her. You mistook her for salvation because you didn't know how to save yourself. You mistook her presence for destiny because you had no direction of your own. You assigned her meaning before she ever had a chance to reveal her truth. And once she did, once her humanness emerged, you didn't know what to do with it. Because the real her wasn't the ideal. She wasn't the fantasy. She was flesh and contradiction and fear just like you. But you couldn't accept that. So you held on to the illusion. You kept loving the version of her that lived inside your mind, the one who healed. You validated, you completed you. And in doing so, you never truly saw her. You saw only the reflection of the man you hoped to be. If she kept choosing you, you thought it was love. The way you showed up for her, the way you gave, the way you softened. You told yourself it was devotion, but deep down it was dependency. Not the kind you'd admit to out loud, not the kind people write songs about. No, this was quieter, deeper. It was the kind of dependency that wears the mask of romance. The kind that makes you think you're leading when you're actually chasing. The kind that tells you you're giving from strength, when in truth, you're offering your masculinity like a bargaining chip, hoping she'll validate it. You say you were generous, but were you offering your vulnerability like a down payment, investing in her approval, waiting for her gaze to stamp you as enough? You wrapped it in poetic language, in sacrifice, in chivalry. But the truth is, you were negotiating. Not consciously, not manipulatively, but emotionally. You believed that if you gave more, proved more, felt more, she'd finally give you what you were too afraid to give yourself permission to feel whole. But love that costs you, your spine, is not love. And intimacy that requires obedience is not intimacy. You weren't just loving her, you were depending on her for identity. She became the compass, the mirror, the verdict. And so you loved, not freely, but conditionally. Not because of who she was, but because of how she made you feel about who you were. And that right there is the most seductive prison, the one that looks like passion, but feels like performance. When men built systems, women learned how to survive them, not by force, not by rebellion, but by watching, adapting, and refining their emotional intelligence into something sharper than logic, intuition. While men shaped the world with steel, war, and structure, women shaped their survival in silence. In a man's world, power doesn't come from confrontation. It comes from calibration. And that's what she mastered, not by design, but by necessity. You think she's gentle because she smiles, because she listens, because she gives. But what if that gentleness is strategy not to deceive, but to remain close, to stay protected? Because closeness is safety. Influence is survival. In a system where she's not the center, she learns to orbit perfectly precisely with just enough gravity to matter and just enough distance to avoid threat. She's not playing games, she's playing defense. And in doing so, she becomes not weaker, but more dangerous. Because she doesn't need to overpower you to own you. She only needs to make herself emotionally indispensable. And the brilliance of it, she does it quietly, without demand, without pressure. She studies how much you're willing to give and learns exactly how little she has to offer to keep you giving. She becomes what power needs: a reflection, a reassurance, a reason. And you don't even notice. You call it chemistry. You call it fate. But it's adaptation, evolution, survival wrapped in softness. She's not trying to dominate your body. She's learned how to live in your mind. And once she's there, you stop asking what she wants because you've already given it. You call her emotional, but you don't realize she's not lost in her feelings. She's fluent in yours. She speaks a language you were never taught: the subtle shifts in tone, the micro-expressions, the pauses between your words. While you were trained to hide emotion, she was trained to detect it. Every silence from you she decodes. Every hesitation she registers. Not because she's manipulative, but because she's had to survive by reading people more than trusting them. She doesn't react, she observes. She maps your emotional terrain with the precision of a cartographer. She learns your rhythm, the way your voice softens when you're unsure, the way you pull back when you feel rejected, the way you search her face when you need reassurance. She notices things you don't even notice about yourself. And that awareness, that mastery, gives her quiet power. She doesn't need to raise her voice to influence you. She just needs to understand you better than you understand yourself. And here's the thing, she rarely uses that knowledge to hurt you, but she will use it to guide you, to steer your behavior, to shape your decisions, to craft how close or how far she wants to stand. You think you're leading, but you're responding. You think you're choosing her, but she's already anticipated your choice. Because the one who understands the emotional language sets the emotional rules. This isn't seduction. This is structure. And once you realize that structure is built around your every feeling, you'll begin to question who's really in control. Here's the truth. You don't want to hear you never really loved her. You loved the feeling you had in her presence. You loved what her attention did to your emptiness. You loved the way she looked at you like you were enough, or at least like you could be. That wasn't love. That was validation. And validation is a drug. It numbs the ache of your own unworthiness. It silences the voice inside that says, you're not whole. And when she showed up, even if only briefly, and reflected back a version of you that felt powerful, worthy, chosen, you mistook that reflection for her. But she wasn't the reflection. She was simply standing where your illusion needed her to stand. You didn't fall in love with her soul. You fell in love with the mirror she unknowingly became. You loved how she made you feel seen, important, necessary. And the more you clung to that feeling, the less you saw her as she truly was. You edited out the contradictions, ignored the red flags, romanticized her distance, and called it mystery. But it wasn't mystery. It was misalignment. And now, as the illusion fades, you feel abandoned not by her, but by the version of yourself that only existed in her gaze. You're not mourning her. You're mourning the man you pretended to be in her presence. Because that man, the one who felt whole when she smiled, was never real. He was the performance. She was the mirror. And love was the illusion. You said she changed, that she became distant, that her warmth turned cold. But what if she didn't change at all? What if the only thing that changed was your illusion of her? Because when the pedestal starts to crack, it's not because the woman has fallen, it's because your fantasy has failed. You didn't build that pedestal to see her clearly. You built it to feel safe, to believe that love, when pure enough, when selfless enough, would always remain. But love built on idealization is fragile. It demands performance from her and from you. And when she stopped performing, when her flaws surfaced, her silence grew, her affection dimmed, you didn't know how to hold it. Because the woman in front of you wasn't the angel you imagined. She was human, complex, conflicted, unfiltered, and that terrified you. Not because she was cruel, but because she was real. And real can't live on a pedestal. Real asks to be known, not worshipped. But you didn't fall in love with her reality. You fell in love with her reflection, the one that made you feel heroic, needed strong. And when that reflection faded, so did your sense of identity. You thought she betrayed you. But the truth is, she simply stopped playing the role you cast her in. And without the script, the play collapsed. And suddenly, you weren't a lover. You were a man standing in the ruins of your own mythology. You didn't lose her. You lost the illusion. And maybe that's exactly what needed to happen. Somewhere along the line, you stopped being a man for yourself and started being a man for her. Your confidence began to depend on her smile. Your strength began to feel real only when she admired it. Your choices, from the way you spoke to what you wore to what you chased, began orbiting the gravitational pull of her approval. You didn't realize it then. Most men don't, because it doesn't feel like submission when it's wrapped in affection. It feels like love, like connection, like finally being seen. But it's not vision, it's validation. And when your sense of worth depends on someone else's gaze, you are never truly standing. You're constantly waiting to be lifted. You thought the relationship made you more of a man, but really it made you a mirror. You reflected what you believed she wanted, what would make her stay, what would make her say, "You're enough." And every time she pulled back, your foundation cracked. Every silent treatment, every retreat, every shift in tone, it shook you. Because her presence didn't just comfort you, it defined you. Without it, you felt exposed, hollow, unformed. But that pain you feel when she turns away, that's not heartbreak, it's identity collapse. Because you didn't build your masculinity, you borrowed it. You rented it from her gaze, hoping it would become real over time. But real manhood can't be leased, it must be forged. And it begins when you stop asking her to confirm who you are and start deciding it for yourself. You keep saying she used you, that she took your heart, your time, your trust. But here's the part you're not saying: you used her too. Not to manipulate, not with malice, but with quiet desperation. You used her as an escape route from yourself. You called it love. But if you're honest, it was something else. It was relief. Relief from the aching silence inside you, from the questions you didn't want to answer, from the work you were afraid to do alone. She didn't just walk into your life, you cast her in a role, a redeemer, a stabilizer, a source of purpose. And when she performed well, you called her the one. But the truth is, she never agreed to be your salvation. She simply filled the emotional space you were too afraid to claim for yourself. You loved being chosen, not because it meant she saw your soul, but because it meant you didn't have to face it alone. You loved her gaze because it distracted you from your chaos. Her presence let you outsource your healing. You made her your meaning, your morality, your mirror, and then called it love. But that's not partnership. That's spiritual avoidance. And when she stopped playing the role, when her eyes no longer reflected the hero you hoped to be, the illusion cracked. You said she abandoned you, but really, she just stopped carrying the burden of your identity. And now, you're left with the one person you've spent your whole life running from yourself. You want to believe she loved you, that her care was unconditional, that her affection came from purity, from connection, from something eternal. But what if it didn't? What if what you mistook for love was adaptation? She didn't craft a strategy to deceive you. She inherited it, not from bitterness, but from history, from generations of women who learned that survival doesn't come through strength, but through subtlety. While men built kingdoms with swords, women learned how to navigate them with silence. You think she's calculating? No. She's responsive. She reads the room not to manipulate, but to remain. She reflects, not to control, but to belong. And yet in that reflection, there's power. Not brute power, but emotional leverage. The kind that doesn't need to demand anything because it already lives inside your decisions. She doesn't have to say a word to steer you. She only has to sense what part of you still aches for approval. Because once she knows, that once she understands where your insecurities hide, she becomes essential, not as a threat, but as a function. She becomes the gravity in your emotional orbit, and you mistake that pull for love. But here's the truth. This isn't cruelty. It's nature. And nature doesn't ask for fairness. It demands efficiency. And in a system where men hold structure, women evolve within it not to be equal, but to be necessary. You keep looking for romance. She's mastered survival. You call it fate. But really, it's evolution doing its quiet work beneath the skin of intimacy. This isn't heartbreak. It's awakening. It feels like pain, yes, sharp, disorienting, unbearable at times. But underneath the ache is something sacred, the return of your own voice. For too long, you were living through hers, measuring your worth by her attention, shaping your identity around her moods, calling it love when it was really self-abandonment. You didn't just want her. You wanted what she gave you permission to feel: significance, direction, purpose. But now, in her absence, there's only silence. And that silence feels terrifying. Because for the first time, there's no one reflecting you back to yourself. But maybe that silence is exactly where you begin. Maybe the man you're meant to become doesn't rise from her approval, but from your stillness. Maybe he's not built from performance, but from presence. Because when you stop orbiting her needs, the gravity breaks. And in that weightlessness, you start to feel your own center again. Not the role you played to be loved, not the script you followed to keep her close, but the raw, unedited core of who you are. She may test it, she may leave, she may try to lure you back into the old rhythm, but if you stay still, if you don't flinch, something shifts. You begin to see her not as salvation, not as villain, not as fantasy, but as another human shaped by her own survival. And for the first time, you no longer need her to complete you, because you're no longer looking for reflection. You're looking for truth. And finally, you're ready to face it. Let it burn. The fantasy, the pedestal, the sweet delusion that told you love would save you. Let it all collapse. Because the longer you cling to the myth, the longer you postpone your becoming. You were taught that love would redeem you, that a woman's affection could heal the fractures inside your soul. But healing doesn't come from someone else's gaze. It comes from the fire you walk through alone. And this is that fire. Let the fantasy die, the one where she was meant to complete. You fix, you crown you. She wasn't. She never was. She's not your angel. She's not your enemy. She's not your missing piece. She's a reflection of nature's difference, not lesser, not higher, just different. And in that difference lies your opportunity, not for control, not for salvation, but for truth. The truth that no one is coming to rescue you. That no gaze, no kiss, no promise will ever be enough until you reclaim the parts of yourself you gave away for love. Because real love begins where illusion ends. When you stop needing her to be soft, pure, selfless. When you stop performing to be chosen. When you stop asking to be healed. Only then can you meet her as an equal, not in fantasy, but in clarity. You will no longer kneel. You will no longer orbit. You will stand. And in that standing, a new kind of love becomes possible, one without leverage, without obedience, without masks. But only if you're willing to let the myth burn. So let it burn. At some point in every man's life, he must ask the question he spent years avoiding. Who am I without her? Without the affection that steadied you? Without the approval that shaped you? Without the fantasy that made you feel whole? If your identity depends on how a woman sees you, then you're not living, you're performing. And performance may win you love, but it will cost you your soul. The truth is, many men confuse emotional dependency with connection. We mistake her reflection of our desires for intimacy. We fall for the version of her that meets our needs and then collapse when she stops reflecting that version back. But this isn't her fault, it's ours. We never learn to build self-worth without an audience. We never learn to feel complete without being chosen. And so, we surrender our power not because she takes it, but because we give it away, hoping she'll make us feel enough. The deeper lesson here isn't to harden to resent or to walk away from love. It's to stop outsourcing your identity. Real strength begins when you no longer need to be seen to know who you are. When you stop asking for permission to matter. When you stop chasing healing in her eyes and start building it from within. Because the man who knows himself truly, quietly, unapologetically, no longer seeks mirrors. He builds truth. And in that truth, love becomes something else entirely. A choice, not a need. A meeting, not a rescue. A reflection, not a replacement.